I downloaded a dark web app that tracks heartbeats. One of the signals is coming from under my floor. It all started with boredom. That's how these things usually go, right? A harmless night where you've got nothing better to do but browse the deepest corners of the internet. I'd always been fascinated by the stories about the dark web, those rumors of hidden sites offering everything from illegal substances to the unnerving mysteries people only whisper about. I never thought I'd actually go there. It was about 2 a.m., and I was scrolling through forums, reading posts that had nothing to do with my life. Then, one comment caught my eye. Someone was talking about an app, Heartbeat, hidden deep in the dark web, a tracker for live heartbeats. At first, it sounded ridiculous, like one of those too scary to be true stories. But people were talking about it like it was real. They mentioned how the app could detect heartbeats within a certain radius, allowing you to monitor people close by without them ever knowing. Creepy, right? But something about it intrigued me. How could such a thing even work? Curiosity got the better of me. It always does. Before I knew it, I'd followed the twisted path of links and anonymous portals until I found it. The site was minimalist. No graphics, no flashy text. Just a download button labeled heartbeat and a warning. Not responsible for what you find. That should have been enough to stop me. But I ignored the warning, convincing myself it was just some experimental tech app or a prank. After all, it couldn't actually track heartbeats, could it? I clicked download. The app installed faster than any app I've ever seen. No setup, no permissions asked, just a black screen with a white dot in the center and a blinking text that read, "Scanning." I stared at it for a minute, waiting for something to happen. The loading symbol blinked a few more times before stopping. Then, one by one, tiny red dots began appearing on the screen, each pulsing slowly. Next to each dot, there was a number. Some read 72 beats per minute, 80 beats per minute, 65 beats per minute. All heart rates apparently. The dots surrounded a larger one in the center, which had 67 beats per minute next to it. That was me. My heart rate. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched the other dots appear on the screen. Some were close, others farther away. I assumed they were the people in the nearby houses. The app was mapping out their heartbeats, reading their pulses like some kind of bizarre human sonar. It was unsettling. I told myself it was probably pulling from Bluetooth devices or Wi-Fi signals or something like that. There had to be a logical explanation, right? I closed the app, ready to delete it. But later that night, lying in bed, I felt this nagging thought creep into my mind. What if it really worked? I opened it again, watching the pulsing dots around me, my own heartbeat steady in the center. I flicked through the app, trying to figure out how it worked. There were no settings, no menu, just the map, the dots, and those heart rates. But then, something caught my attention. One of the dots was too close, much too close. It was directly below my own, pulsing at a slow, steady 61 beats per minute, like the person was asleep. The dot wasn't in the house next door or on the street outside. It was under my house. I stared at the screen, thinking it was a glitch, but the dot didn't move. The heart rate didn't change. It was just there, calm and steady, beneath my feet. I sat up in bed, staring at the floor, listening, but there was nothing. No noise, no sign of movement. I shut the app off, convincing myself I was being stupid. It was just a glitch, a mistake in the code. But the next night, it was still there. I tried to forget about it at first, but that little red dot stayed in my mind like a splinter. For days, I didn't open the app, thinking if I left it alone, the whole thing would just disappear. like a bad dream, but it didn't. The thought gnawed at me constantly. What if, on the third night, curiosity won again? I opened the app, half hoping the dot would be gone. Maybe it was just some random signal that had gotten mixed up. Maybe it had been a fluke. But it wasn't. The dot was still there, directly beneath me, pulsing slowly, at 61 beats per minute. I got out of bed and tiptoed across the floor, half expecting to hear something. A knock, a shuffle, some sign of life. But there was only silence. I knelt down, placing my ear to the wooden boards, listening as hard as I could. Nothing. My mind raced. Maybe there's a crawl space I didn't know about, I thought. I'd lived in the house for a year, and I'd never thought to check. It wasn't an old house, and I wasn't the first owner. But what if the previous owners had left something behind? Or someone? The idea planted itself in my brain, and suddenly, I couldn't think of anything else. I had to check. There had to be an explanation, something rational. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, heart pounding in my chest as I crouched beside the house. There was an old access panel on the side, covered in dirt and grime. I don't even know why I'd never noticed it before. I pried it open, the rusty nails creaking as the wood gave way. A damp, musty smell wafted out, making me gag. The crawl space was small, barely large enough to fit a person, but it was deep. I shone the flashlight inside, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing but dirt and cobwebs. I sighed in relief, feeling ridiculous for letting my imagination get the best of me. It was just some glitch. A messed up app pulling signals from somewhere it shouldn't. But as I started to close the panel, something caught my eye. A flash of movement, just at the edge of the light. I froze. Slowly I raised the flashlight again, sweeping the beam across the space, and that's when I saw it. A footprint, fresh, pressed deep into the dirt, and it wasn't mine. The sight of that footprint, half buried in the damp dirt under my house, sent a cold wave of dread washing over me. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a child's foot, or a small adult's, but it was unmistakably fresh. My mind raced as I tried to process it. How long had it been there? Who could have left it? And how had I never noticed before? I slowly backed away from the access panel, a flashlight beam shaking in my hand. I glanced around the yard, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the street was empty, bathed in the yellow glow of a distant streetlight. There was no sign of movement, no sound, except for the wind brushing through the tree. But that didn't make me feel any safer. The quiet only made it worse. I hurried back inside, slamming the door behind me, locking it twice for good measure. My heart was still racing, the image of that footprint burning in my mind. I paced the living room, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. There had to be an explanation. Maybe a contractor had been under there when the house was built. Maybe animals had disturbed the ground. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I remembered the app. The heartbeat, steady and slow, directly beneath me. And the footprint wasn't animal-sized. It was human. I grabbed my phone, desperate to check the app again. I opened Heartbeat, and once again, my pulse quickened as the red dots appeared on the screen, mapping out the nearby heartbeats like before. The dot was still there, 61 beats per minute, right beneath my feet. I stared at the screen, the pulsing dot taunting me. It wasn't a glitch, it wasn't my imagination. Someone or something was down there, and it had been there this whole time, completely silent, completely hidden. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the app, frozen in indecision. Part of me wanted to call the police, to let them deal with whatever was lurking beneath my house. But then, Reality kicked in. What was I going to tell them? That I downloaded some shady app from the dark web that tracks heartbeats? They'd probably think I was insane or on drugs. And even if they did believe me, what would they find? Some disturbed dirt and a single footprint? That wasn't enough. I needed to be sure. I felt stupid, but I couldn't help myself. I grabbed a kitchen knife, like that would protect me from whatever was down there, and headed back outside, my hands trembling. This time, when I opened the access panel, the musty air hit me even harder, and a part of me wondered if I should just seal the thing up and forget I ever saw it. But curiosity, no, fear, drove me forward. I crouched down and shone the flashlight inside again, my eyes scanning the crawl space with more attention to detail this time. The footprint was still there, clear as day, pressed into the dirt. But now I saw something else. More prints. Small, almost indistinguishable from the rough surface of the ground, leading deeper into the crawl space, toward the farthest corner, where the light barely reached. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, as I considered what to do. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but something about this, about the whole situation, compelled me to figure it out. I needed to know who, or what, had been living under my floor. I slid into the crawl space, dragging the flashlight along with me, the sharp rocks and dirt digging into my palms. The space was tighter than I'd expected, forcing me to crouch low as I crawled deeper, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. I followed the trail of footprints, feeling the tension rise with every step, and then I heard it, a faint rustling. It was quiet, barely more than a whisper, but it sent my heart racing again. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. It came again, louder this time, like someone or something was shifting in the darkness ahead of me. I shone the flashlight toward the sound, but the beam flickered, casting long, jittery shadows against the walls of the crawl space. My stomach twisted in knots, but I forced myself to keep moving, inching closer and closer to the far corner, where the footprints disappeared. And that's when I saw it. There was a small, makeshift bed, a bundle of old tattered blankets and pillows, half buried in the dirt. Beside it were cans of food, all unopened, their labels faded and covered in dust. I stared in disbelief. Someone had been living down here. For how long, I couldn't even guess. The air felt thick, suffocating, as I realized the truth. This wasn't just some glitch in an app. This wasn't an error. Someone had been hiding right under my house, and judging by the fresh footprint, they might still be here. I spun around, ready to scramble out of the crawl space as fast as I could, when the flashlight flickered again, this time plunging me into complete darkness. I cursed under my breath, smacking the side of the flashlight, but it didn't come back on. The rustling sound returned, louder now, closer. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, suffocating me. And then I heard something worse. Breathing. Slow. Steady. But it wasn't mine. It was coming from right behind me. That slow, rhythmic breathing behind me was too real, too close. My pulse roared in my ears, the darkness wrapping tighter around me as if it were alive. I didn't dare move. For what felt like minutes, I stayed completely still, gripping the dead flashlight so hard my knuckles ached. The air in the crawl space seemed to thicken with every breath, that steady inhale and exhale from behind me, never stopping. It was like being hunted. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't see. I couldn't move. And whatever was back there, whatever had made that footprint, was watching me, listening to me breathe, and I had nowhere to go. The silence between each breath stretched out, the seconds feeling like hours. My instincts screamed at me to bolt, to scramble back the way I came. But I knew the moment I made a sound, whoever was down there with me would hear it. They were already too close. Suddenly, a new noise cut through the stillness. A faint, clicking sound, like metal tapping against stone. It was coming from the far corner of the crawl space, not far from the makeshift bed. I didn't know what it was, but it sent a shiver down my spine. The breathing stopped, and then the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate steps, moving through the dirt. They weren't heavy, barely more than a whisper against the ground, but each one brought the presence behind me closer. My body tensed, every nerve screaming at me to run. But where? The crawl space was a dead end, and I was crouched in the farthest corner. The only way out was back past them. I gritted my teeth and inched forward, moving as quietly as I could, trying to stay ahead of the footsteps without giving myself away. The space felt impossibly tight now, the air damp and thick with the smell of dirt and decay. I crawled faster, not caring about the rocks and debris cutting into my palms anymore. The only thing that mattered was getting out, but the steps followed, matching my pace. I could feel it now. Whoever was behind me wasn't just walking, they were following me. I kept my head low, barely able to see more than a few inches in front of me in the darkness. The tunnel felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in as I moved, scraping against my sides. Just when I thought I was far enough away to catch my breath, the breathing started again. Closer this time, directly behind me. I panicked. Without thinking, I scrambled forward as fast as I could, my knees and elbows slamming into the ground as I crawled, desperate to get away. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I didn't care about who or what might hear me. All I cared about was getting out of that crawl space, away from whatever had been hiding beneath my house. The footsteps sped up. I could hear them closing in behind me, moving faster now, the sound of their breathing overlapping with my own ragged gasps. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain in my arms and legs, my eyes desperately searching for the faintest sign of light, the way out, and then there it was, the narrow opening of the access panel, just a few feet away. I could see the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the crack in the wood. I was so close. I could make it. But as I reached for the edge, something cold and hard grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly, but the grip tightened, pulling me back into the darkness. I twisted around, frantically yanking at my leg, and that's when I saw it. Just a glimpse in the faint moonlight. A hand, thin, pale, with dirt-caked fingernails digging into my skin. I kicked harder, my heel connecting with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip loosened just enough for me to tear my foot free. I lunged forward, scrambling out of the crawl space and into the open air, the cool night breeze hitting my face like a slap. I didn't stop running, not for a second. I tore around the side of the house and burst through my front door, slamming it shut behind me, locking it and every other door and window in the house. My body was shaking uncontrollably, every muscle screaming from the effort of escaping. I collapsed on the couch, my mind spinning, heart pounding so hard it hurt. But I wasn't safe. I knew that much. Whatever or whoever was under my house, they knew I'd found them, and they weren't going to stop now. For a while, I just sat there in silence, staring at the door, half expecting it to burst open. But nothing happened. Slowly, my breathing steadied, and I reached for my phone, hands trembling as I opened Heartbeat. The screen flickered to life, and the red dots appeared again, pulsing around me in their slow, steady rhythm. The dot beneath my house was still there, but it wasn't alone. There were two dots now, both of them pulsing at the same rate, both of them coming from directly beneath me. I stared at the screen in disbelief, feeling the familiar weight of dread settle in my chest. I thought back to that hand, that thin, dirt-covered hand that had grabbed me. Whoever or whatever it belonged to, they weren't alone, and they weren't done with me yet. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, and a notification popped up from the app. Live feed detected. Open camera? I hesitated for a second, then tapped the screen. The camera opened, showing a black void at first, but then the image shifted. The feed was coming from below, deep in the crawl space. And there, barely visible in the flickering light, was a face. It wasn't human. The face stared up at me from the live feed, pale and distorted by the dim light in the crawl space. It looked human, but not quite. Its features were all wrong, too sharp, too stretched, as though someone had taken a person's face and pulled at the edges until it became something else. The eyes were wide, unnaturally large, reflecting the faint light, like a predator watching from the darkness. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I held the phone. The image burned into my brain. I knew I should close the app, turn off the phone, do something to block out whatever horror was lurking beneath my house. But I couldn't. I was frozen, staring at that awful warped face, its lips curled in what could only be described as a grin. A grin that was too wide, too knowing. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, the face in the feed shifted. Its head tilted slightly, as if it could see me, as if it was studying me, just as I was studying it. The grin stretched wider, and I could almost hear it. A low, wet sound, like someone dragging their tongue over their teeth. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, and the image blinked off, leaving the room in darkness. I backed away, hands trembling, my mind struggling to process what I'd just seen. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't real, that it had been a trick of the light, a glitch in the app. But I knew better. That thing, whatever it was, had been watching me. And now it knew I was watching it back. I grabbed the phone from the floor, fumbling to close the app, to shut it down before it could show me anything else. But just as my fingers hovered over the screen, the phone buzzed again. Another notification, another message. This one wasn't from Heartbeat. It was a text message, and it was from an unknown number. My stomach twisted into knots as I opened it, dread creeping up my spine with every passing second. Stop looking. That was all it said. 2 words. But those 2 words felt like a warning, a threat. I slammed the phone down on the coffee table, my hands shaking uncontrollably. This was too much. Whatever had started as a stupid game, a curiosity about the dark web, had turned into something far more dangerous. And now, I was caught in the middle of it. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in the house anymore, not with whatever was lurking beneath it. I grabbed my keys, my bag, anything I could think of, and made for the door. But just as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again. Another message. You can't run. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. My heart was hammering in my chest, my mind spinning with thoughts of what I had seen, what had grabbed my ankle, what had been watching me from under the floor. I turned back to the living room, my eyes darting to the ground as if expecting to see something crawling up through the boards. I couldn't stay, but where could I go? If this thing, this person or creature, had been watching me, following me, then running, wouldn't change anything. It would still find me. It would still follow. My phone buzzed once more, and this time, it wasn't a message. It was another notification from Heartbeat. New signal detected. Against every instinct, I opened the app again. The familiar black screen appeared, red dots slowly blinking into view. tracking the heartbeats around me. The dot below my house was still there, pulsing steadily, but now there was a third dot, this one closer. Much closer. The third heartbeat was inside my house. I could feel my blood run cold as I looked around the room. There was no one there, but the app didn't lie. Whoever, or whatever, had left that footprint under my house was now inside. Suddenly, I heard it. A faint creak. It came from upstairs, soft at first, like the weight of a body shifting on the floorboards. Then another creak, this one louder. I stared at the ceiling, paralyzed with fear, listening as the sounds grew more distinct, more deliberate. It wasn't just settling wood. Someone was walking upstairs. I backed toward the front door, barely able to breathe. The creaks were coming closer, moving toward the staircase, toward me. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't need to look at it to know what it was. The heartbeat was getting closer. I gripped the door handle, yanking it open, and bolted out into the night. I didn't care where I was going, only that I had to get out of there, away from whatever was inside my house. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face as I ran down the street, my footsteps echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, my lungs burning, my legs shaking from the effort. I stumbled into the shadows of a nearby alley, collapsing against a brick wall, struggling to catch my breath. My phone buzzed in my hand again, but I was too terrified to look. I knew what it would say. I knew the dots would still be there, that those heartbeats would still be pulsing, that they were still coming for me. I forced myself to open the app one last time, my hands shaking as the screen flickered to life. The dots appeared again, but this time there were 4. The fourth heartbeat wasn't far from me. It was close. Too close. My heart skipped a beat as I heard it, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps behind me. I didn't dare turn around. The footsteps behind me were slow and deliberate, each one sending a jolt of terror through my body. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the ground. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't. My legs felt rooted in place, as if my fear had become a physical weight, pinning me to the spot. I could feel it, whoever or whatever was behind me, just standing there breathing, waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut, every nerve in my body screaming to turn around, to face whatever horror had followed me out of my house. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't survive that. Whatever it wasn't something I could fight, and it didn't need me to look. It already had me. The sound of the footsteps stopped, and a low, raspy breathing filled the silence. It was close, too close. I could feel the warmth of its breath on the back of my neck, slow and steady, like it was savoring the moment. Every inhale felt deliberate, like it was studying me, deciding what to do next. I took a slow breath, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest, but it didn't help. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Then I heard it, the faintest sound. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't footsteps this time. It was something metallic tapping softly against the ground. A slow, methodical sound, like someone tapping the edge of a knife against the pavement. The noise sent a shiver through me, and I bit down on my lip, trying to stop myself from crying out. I knew if I made a sound, it would be over. The breathing stopped. The tapping stopped. Silence. I didn't dare move, my body frozen in fear, every muscle locked in place. The night seemed to stretch on, the darkness pressing in on me, from all sides. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Whatever was behind me was waiting for something, for me to move, for me to acknowledge it. I knew that once I did, it would act. Suddenly, my phone lit up on the ground. the screen illuminating the alley in a cold, blue light. The app was still open, the dots still pulsing. But now, there were 5 dots. My heart stopped as I stared at the screen. 5 dots, each one with a different heartbeat, pulsing at different rates. The new dot was closer than any of the others, almost on top of me. I glanced down at the BPM, reading next to it. 59 beats per minuto? That wasn't mine. Mine was higher, much higher. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus, trying to think. There had to be an explanation. Some reason why the app was showing another heartbeat right next to me, closer than it should have been. But deep down, I knew there was only one explanation. It wasn't showing a random signal. It wasn't showing a mistake. It was showing them. I forced myself to look up, to slowly turn my head toward the shadow behind me. The moment I did, the metallic tapping started again. This time louder, more insistent. My heart raced, my breath catching in my throat as I finally turned to face it. But there was no one there. Just the empty alley, stretching out into the night, illuminated by the pale glow of the streetlights in the distance. For a brief second, I almost believed I was safe, that it had been in my head. But the app was still showing that 5th heartbeat, still pulsing, still right next to me. And then I saw it. A shadow, impossibly tall, standing just out of the light, watching me. It wasn't a person, at least not anymore. Its outline was distorted, wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then slowly, it took a step forward. The tapping grew louder, closer, echoing through the alley. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the edge of the curb. My hands flew out instinctively to catch myself, but the moment I did, the shadow rushed forward, closing the distance in an instant. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was trapped in my throat, choking on the terror that had gripped me. The shadow loomed over me, its presence suffocating. The air around me felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't describe. It didn't speak. It didn't move. And then I felt it. A cold, bony hand on my shoulder. I gasped, my entire body jolting as the icy fingers wrapped around me, pulling me closer. My vision blurred, my pulse thundering in my ears as I struggled to break free, but it was useless. The grip was too strong, too real. I could feel it draining me, pulling the life out of me inch by inch. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. The shadow froze. For a moment, everything was still. And then, I heard it. A heartbeat. Not my own, but slow and steady, pulsing in sync with the one on the app. 59 beats per minuto. I was too weak to fight, too weak to scream. The last thing I saw before everything went black was a shadow's face, emerging from the darkness, twisted, contorted, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light, and that grin, that horrible, wide grin. I woke up in my own bed the next morning, drenched in sweat, my heart still racing. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare, some twisted hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But then I glanced at my phone, sitting on the nightstand next to me, the screen still glowing faintly. The app was open, and there were still 5 heartbeats. One of them was mine, and one of them was coming from right outside my bedroom door. I found a job posting on the dark web to babysit a kid for one night. They never told me what was wrong with him. It's hard to admit that desperation led me to the dark web. I'd heard all the horror stories, but things were getting tight. Rent was due, my car was on its last legs, and work hours had been cut down. It seemed like every door was slamming shut, and I was scrambling to keep my life from spiraling out of control. I've always been cautious. I wasn't looking for anything dangerous, just something quick, maybe even under the table, to help me get by for a while. You know how those random shady job postings pop up? Earn cash fast, or easy money, no experience needed. They usually scream scam, but this one caught my eye. It was simple, straightforward. Babysitter needed for one night, high pay, must not ask questions. Okay, I'll admit that last part threw me off, but at the time, I was more focused on the high pay bit. The amount they were offering was way more than any regular babysitting gig. We're talking thousands for a single night's work. Too good to be true, right? I hesitated for a long time, debating if I should even consider it. My gut screamed no, but the offer was exactly what I needed to get back on my feet. I figured it was just some rich, eccentric family looking for someone who wouldn't ask nosy questions. Maybe they were the type that wanted to avoid attention. People have their quirks, right? So, I replied. The response came almost immediately, like they'd been waiting. They asked if I was available the following night. I agreed, and within minutes, I received the address. No other details. Just a time, a place, and one more instruction. Do not bring your phone. That should have been my first red flag. But again, I told myself it was probably just a weird rich person thing. Maybe they didn't want anyone taking pictures of their fancy house or something. I convinced myself to go. After all, I needed the money. When I pulled up to the address the next evening, I expected a mansion. You know, some extravagant place out in the middle of nowhere. But what I found was just a regular house. It wasn't run down or anything, but it wasn't luxurious either. It was just your typical suburban home. 2 stories, well-kept lawn, nothing too fancy. That's when things started feeling off. There were no lights on inside, no cars in the driveway. The house was eerily quiet, and I felt like I was being watched before I even stepped out of the car. Still, I reminded myself of the money and walked up to the front door. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, the door swung open on its own. Standing in the doorway was a man, probably in his late 40s, wearing a suit. His face was expressionless, and his eyes never quite met mine. He didn't introduce himself, didn't offer a greeting, just stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. "Are you the babysitter?" he asked, his voice flat, almost robotic. I nodded, feeling my pulse quicken. He didn't say anything after that, just handed me a small envelope and pointed to a hallway at the back of the house. "The boy is upstairs. Do not leave the house until morning," he said, his eyes still avoiding mine. Before I could ask any questions, he was gone, just like that. The door clicked shut behind him, and I stood there, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but the weight of my situation kept me rooted in place. I told myself I could handle one night, especially for the payout they promised. I walked deeper into the house. The place was unnervingly quiet. The air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I reached the base of the stairs and took a deep breath before making my way up. Each step creaked beneath my feet, echoing through the empty house. At the top of the stairs, there were 3 doors. The one at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar, a dim light spilling out. I figured that must be the kids' room. When I stepped inside, my heart skipped a beat. The boy, if you could even call him that, was sitting in the middle of the room on the floor. He looked about 8 or 9, but there was something off about him. His skin was pale, almost gray under the dim light. His hair was matted, like it hadn't been brushed in weeks, and his eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead at the far wall. "Hey, I'm here to watch you tonight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. He didn't even acknowledge that I had spoken. I stood there awkwardly, waiting for him to do something, anything. But he just sat there, perfectly still, staring at that damn wall like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I glanced around the room, taking in the details. It was bare, almost unsettlingly so. There was no bed, no toys, nothing that suggested a child lived there. Just the boy, and the flickering light above him. I moved closer, kneeling down to his level, trying to get him to look at me. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need anything?" Nothing, not even a blink. I was starting to feel more uneasy by the second. I had babysat before, plenty of times, but this wasn't normal. Something was wrong with this kid, and no one had bothered to tell me what. I sat down across from him, unsure of what else to do. Maybe he was just shy, or traumatized, or something. The silence stretched on. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, and still, he didn't move. Then, just as I was about to get up and leave the room, he spoke. "You shouldn't have come." The words were so quiet, I almost didn't hear them, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. His voice was monotone, hollow, like he wasn't really there. I froze, my mouth dry. "What do you mean?" The boy slowly turned his head, his eyes locking onto mine for the first time. And that's when I realized something wasn't right. His pupils were unnaturally wide, almost black, swallowing the color of his eyes completely. There was something in them, something old, like he'd seen far more than any child should ever see. "You shouldn't have come," he repeated, his gaze never wavering. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on me, and for the first time since I entered that house, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned and bolted down the stairs, not caring how loud my footsteps were anymore. I needed to leave, but when I reached the front door, I stopped. It was locked, and the key was gone. I fumbled with the door, trying to turn the knob over and over, but it wouldn't budge. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my back. I checked my pockets, hoping maybe I had dropped the key somewhere, but it was gone. There was no way out. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the stairs behind me. I spun around, expecting to see the boy, but the hallway was empty. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't explain. The whole house seemed to hum, like it was alive and aware of me, like it was waiting. I swallowed hard and tried to think rationally. There had to be another way out, a back door, a window, anything. But as I glanced around the front hall, nothing stood out. The windows were sealed, and the back of the house was still cloaked in that unsettling darkness. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to go back upstairs. I didn't want to, but I couldn't just stay there, waiting for something to happen. My footsteps felt heavy as I climbed, the creak of each step echoing in the silent house. When I reached the top, the boy's room was exactly how I'd left it. Door slightly ajar, that faint light still flickering. But now, the boy was standing. He was by the window, staring out into the darkness beyond. His back was to me, but I could feel that same eerie weight in the room, like something was pushing down on me. I cleared my throat, trying to sound calm, even though my voice shook. "Hey, is everything okay?" I asked, taking a step inside. He didn't move, just stood there, frozen, his small frame almost blending into the shadows. My skin prickled with unease. I wasn't sure what I expected him to say. Maybe nothing, but the silence was unbearable. I moved closer, hoping to coax some kind of response from him. When I reached the window, I glanced out, trying to see what he was looking at. But there was nothing out there, just the empty yard and the thick stretch of woods beyond. That's when he finally spoke again, his voice barely more than a whisper. "They come at night." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned to face him, but he still wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on something out there, something I couldn't see. The way he said it, so calm, so matter of fact, sent a shiver down my spine. "Who comes at night?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The boy's head tilted slightly, like he was considering my question. His eyes slowly shifted from the window to meet mine, and for a moment, I could swear I saw something move outside, just a flicker of movement in the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. "They always come," he said, as if that was supposed to explain everything. I took a step back, my heart racing. Something was wrong here, something I couldn't put my finger on. The boy's behavior, the locked door, the eerie quiet of the house. It was all adding up to something I didn't want to face. I needed to leave. Now, I turned to go back downstairs, determined to find another way out. But as soon as I stepped into the hallway, I heard it again. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the house. Only this time, they were coming from inside the walls. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound grew louder, closer, like someone or something was moving through the house, watching me from just beyond the surface. I looked back at the boy, but he hadn't moved. His expression hadn't changed. It was like he didn't hear it, like none of this was new to him. I backed up against the wall, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The footsteps stopped, but the air felt heavier now, thick with tension. And then, from somewhere deep inside the house, I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't words exactly, just a faint, low murmur, like someone was speaking through the walls. I strained to hear, my skin crawling as the sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was right beside me. I bolted down the stairs, my hands shaking as I tried the front door again. Still locked. I yanked on it, trying to force it open, but it didn't budge. My chest tightened as the whispers seemed to surround me, filling the house like a thick fog. I glanced back up the stairs, expecting to see the boy standing at the top, watching me. But he wasn't there. My pulse quickened. I turned and ran through the house, searching for anything that could help. Another door, a key, a phone. But there was nothing. The house seemed to have swallowed all sense of logic, trapping me in a maze of its own making. Finally, I found myself in the kitchen. It was as bare as the rest of the house, cold and sterile, like no one had used it in years. But there was a door, one I hadn't noticed before. It led to the basement. I hesitated. There was something about the door that felt wrong, like it was waiting for me. But the whispers were growing louder, more insistent, and I had no other options. I needed to get out, and maybe, just maybe, the basement had a way. I opened the door slowly, peering down into the darkness. The stairs were steep, and the air smelled damp and musty, like the basement hadn't been touched in ages. But I had no choice. I took a step down, then another, until the door creaked shut behind me with a soft, almost final click. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, and the whispers, they were louder down here, almost deafening. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The basement was larger than I expected, filled with old furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked in the corners, and something else. Something I couldn't quite make out at first. But when I saw it, my stomach dropped. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single, flickering bulb, was a large wooden crate. It was old, weathered, and the lid was slightly ajar. The whispers seemed to be coming from inside. I took a step closer, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but my feet kept moving. I had to know. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the edge of the crate. And then, without warning, the lid slid open. Inside was something that shouldn't exist. Inside the crate, nestled among tattered blankets and old photographs, was a collection of antique dolls. Their porcelain faces were cracked, eyes faded, and limbs twisted at unnatural angles. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Each doll bore a striking resemblance to the boy upstairs. The same hollow eyes, the same eerie expression. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these weren't just ordinary dolls. They felt personal, like fragments of a story I wasn't meant to uncover. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a cold breeze, their indistinct words pressing against my ears. I stepped back, my foot crunching on something brittle. Looking down, I saw shards of old, broken mirrors scattered across the floor. Reflections of my own frightened face stared back at me from the fractured pieces, distorted and haunting. That's when I noticed the photographs pinned to the wall behind the crate. Faded and yellowed with age, they depicted various people, men, women, children, all standing in front of the same house. This house. Their eyes were scratched out, leaving only blank spaces where their gazes should have been. My heart pounded as I scanned the images. One photo caught my eye. A woman holding the hand of a little boy. Her face was eerily similar to the man who'd hired me, but older, more worn. And the boy, he was the same one upstairs, but the photo looked decades old. How was that possible? A sudden thud echoed from above, jolting me back to the present. The whispers ceased abruptly, plunging the basement into a suffocating silence. I strained to listen, my ears tuning into the faint creaks and groans of the house settling. But then, a slow, deliberate footstep resonated from the floor above. He was moving. I needed to get out of there. Clutching one of the photographs, I hurried back up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air grew colder as I reached the main floor, my breath forming small clouds in front of me. The layout of the house seemed different somehow. The hallway stretched longer, the shadows deeper. Doors that had been closed were now ajar, revealing darkened rooms that beckoned ominously. I tried to ignore them, focusing on finding a way out. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Is anyone there?" No response. I made my way to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The door was different. What had once been a sturdy oak door was now an old, weathered barrier, the wood warped and the paint peeling away. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I tugged at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I pulled harder, the wood groaning but holding firm. I banged on the door, hoping someone outside might hear me, but the sound seemed to be swallowed by the thick air. A soft giggle echoed from behind me. I spun around to see the boy standing at the foot of the stairs, his head tilted slightly as he watched me. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, and a faint smile played on his lips. "Why are you trying to leave?" he asked innocently. I swallowed hard. I just need some fresh air." He took a slow step toward me. "You can't leave. Not yet." My grip tightened on the photograph in my hand. "What is this place? What's going on?" He glanced at the picture. "You've seen them, haven't you? The others." "Who are they?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "They were like you," he replied cryptically. "They came, they stayed, they never left. A cold dread settled over me. I backed away, keeping my eyes on him. I don't understand. Where are they now? He pointed upward. Still here. Before I could question him further, a creaking sound echoed from the walls, followed by a soft tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. The house seemed to come alive, the very structure shifting and groaning. I think it's time, the boy whispered. Time for what? I asked, fear creeping into my voice. He smiled wider. For you to meet them. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, darting just out of sight. I could feel a presence surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. I don't want to meet anyone, I stammered. I just want to leave. But they've been waiting for you, he insisted. I turned and bolted down the hallway, desperately searching for another exit. The house seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Doors led to empty rooms, windows revealed only darkness outside. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping in a cacophony of unintelligible voices. My head pounded as I stumbled through the maze, the boys' laughter echoing behind me. Finally, I burst into a room that was different from the rest. It was filled with old toys, stuffed animals with missing eyes, wooden blocks scattered across the floor, a rocking horse that moved gently on its own. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, its surface tarnished and clouded. As I approached, the reflections began to shift. Instead of my own, I saw faces, those of the people from the photographs, staring back at me with hollow eyes. I stepped back in horror, but the door slammed shut behind me. The temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the icy air. Join us, a chorus of voices whispered. I pressed myself against the door, frantically trying to open it, but it was locked tight. The faces in the mirror began to emerge, their forms pressing against the glass, as if trying to break through. The boy appeared beside the mirror, watching me with a calm expression. They need someone to help them, he said softly. Help them? With what? I cried. To be free, he replied. They can't move on without someone to take their place. Realization dawned on me. No, I won't do it. He tilted his head. It's already begun. The shadows in the room converged, swirling around me like a vortex. The whispers grew to a deafening roar, and the mirror's surface rippled as the figures pushed against it. Summoning every ounce of strength, I closed my eyes and screamed, "Leave me alone." Silence. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The mirror was gone. The toys vanished. I was standing in the middle of a bare, dilapidated space, the walls cracked and covered in peeling wallpaper. I heard a faint knocking behind me. Turning slowly, I saw a small door, one that hadn't been there before. With no other options, I approached it cautiously and pulled it open. A staircase leading downward greeted me, lit by a single flickering bulb. Taking a deep breath, I descended, each step creaking ominously. At the bottom, I found myself back in the basement, but it was different now. The crate was gone, replaced by a circle of old chairs. Seated in them were the dolls, now life-sized, their empty eyes fixed on me. In the center stood the boy. It's time to choose, he said. Choose what? I whispered. Stay with us, or take someone else's place. I don't understand. He stepped closer. You can leave, but only if someone else comes. Someone to take your spot. I thought of the job posting, the lure of easy money. How many others had fallen into this trap? How many more would if I didn't stop it? Gathering my courage, I made a decision. I'll find a way to end this. You can't keep doing this to people. He smiled sadly. It's not up to me. Before I could respond, The ground beneath me began to shake. The walls cracked and the ceiling started to collapse. I turned and ran, racing up the stairs as the house crumbled around me. Bursting through the front door, which now opened effortlessly, I stumbled into the dawn light. Behind me, the house groaned and shuddered, but when I looked back, it was whole again, standing silent and ominous. I didn't wait. I got into my car and drove away as fast as I could, vowing never to return. But as I merged onto the highway, my phone, which I'd left hidden in the car despite their instructions, buzzed with a new email notification. Curiosity getting the better of me, I glanced at the screen. New job opportunity, high pay for one night of work, no questions asked. I felt a cold dread settle in. The cycle was starting again, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. For days, I couldn't shake the house from my mind. The things I'd seen, the boy, the whispers, it was all burned into my memory like a dark stain that wouldn't fade. I stayed away from the dark web, of course, deleted everything that could even remotely connect me back to that twisted job posting. But no matter what I did, there was always this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach, like something wasn't finished. I tried to move on, throw myself back into normal life, but every time I closed my eyes, I could see that house, feel the suffocating air pressing down on me, and hear the faint, eerie laughter of the boy echoing in my head. It was like the place had left a permanent imprint on me, and the more I tried to push it away, the stronger it got. Then, one evening, as I was sitting in my apartment, staring blankly at the TV, my phone buzzed. Not my regular phone, the burner phone I'd kept, the one I used for the babysitting job. The screen lit up with an unknown number. My heart raced. I knew, even before answering, that this was connected to the house. My fingers hovered over the answer button for a moment, debating whether I should pick it up or smash the phone to pieces. But curiosity, that same toxic curiosity that got me into this mess, won out. I answered. Hello? My voice came out shaky, betraying the calm I was trying to project. There was silence on the other end, but just as I was about to hang up, a familiar voice spoke. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. You left before you made your choice. It was the boy. My blood ran cold. I felt my grip tighten on the phone, my knuckles turning white. What do you mean? I left. It's over. The boy's voice didn't change, still calm, almost innocent. You know it's not over. They're still waiting. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Who's waiting? The ones from the house, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. They need someone, and you didn't choose. I could barely breathe. The pressure of whatever game was being played was squeezing the air out of my lungs. I'm not going back there, I managed to say. They'll come to you then, the boy said, his tone not threatening, but chilling in its simplicity. You'll see. The line went dead. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the phone. My apartment felt too small, too dark, like the walls were closing in on me. I wanted to believe it was a prank, a leftover echo of that nightmare of a night. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The house, the thing inside it wasn't done with me yet. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. It was subtle at first. Small things that could be easily brushed off as coincidence. Lights flickering, cold drafts in my apartment, objects shifting ever so slightly from where I'd left them. I told myself I was just paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, the footsteps started. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet, I would hear them. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth in the hallway outside my door. Every night, they grew louder, closer, until it felt like whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was standing just inches from my door, waiting. I never opened it. One night, after the footsteps stopped, I heard something else. A soft, almost imperceptible knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat, and I sat up in bed, paralyzed with fear. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but no sound would come out. Finally, I forced myself to move. Slowly, I crept towards the door, my hands shaking. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Silence. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the knock to return, but it didn't. Just as I started to relax, there was a scratching sound, soft like fingernails dragging across the door. My body went cold. "Let us in," a voice whispered from the other side. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. It wasn't the boy's voice. It was something else, something darker, more desperate. I backed away from the door, retreating into my bedroom and locking myself inside. I sat there, clutching the phone, too terrified to call anyone. The scratching continued for hours, a constant, unnerving reminder that something was trying to get in. And then, just before dawn, it stopped. For the next few days, I barely slept. I stayed locked in my apartment, jumping at every creak and shadow, waiting for the next sign that they were still out there, waiting for me to make my choice. One afternoon, in broad daylight, there was a knock at the door. I froze, my body tense, but this knock was different. It was louder, more confident. I cautiously approached the door, peeking through the peephole. It was a man, dressed in a suit, clean cut, with an air of authority about him. I hesitated, then opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He smiled, but there was something off about it, too wide, too practiced. "I'm here about the job, the one-night babysitting gig." My stomach dropped. How did he know? "I didn't post any job," I said quickly, my voice shaking now. The man tilted his head, his smile never fading. "I know. You took the job, but it's not finished yet." I slammed the door shut, my heart racing, but he didn't knock again. Instead, I heard his voice through the door, calm, measured. "You can't run from them forever. They're going to come for you. You need to choose." I backed away from the door, feeling like the walls were closing in. The shadows in the apartment seemed darker, heavier. I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to slip up, to make the wrong move. That night, the footsteps returned. Only this time, they didn't stop at the hallway. They entered my apartment. I could hear them moving through the rooms, slow, deliberate, drawing closer to where I was hiding. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The air grew cold, the darkness around me thickening, suffocating. And then, the boy's voice echoed through the room. "You have to choose." Trembling, I whispered, "Choose what?" "The next one," he said. "It's either you or someone else. Someone has to take your place." I stared into the darkness, my mind racing. It was impossible. None of this made sense, but I knew he was right. The whispers, the footsteps, the shadows, they wouldn't stop until I made a decision. I felt something cold brush against my skin, like fingers trailing along my arm. "Make your choice," the boy whispered. And in that moment, I realized there was no way out. Not really. I sat in the darkness, the boy's voice echoing through the apartment like a haunting melody. The cold air pressed against my skin, each breath feeling heavier than the last. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing, frantically searching for some kind of solution, some way to escape this nightmare. But deep down, I knew there was no escaping it. Not anymore. The boy's voice came again, softer this time. You can't run from it. The choice has to be made. I felt that same cold presence move closer, like invisible hands reaching out from the shadows. My heart pounded as I scrambled to my feet, backing up against the wall. My mind raced. There had to be another way. Maybe if I could just hold out until morning, the light would make it all go away. Maybe this was all a twisted dream, but the footsteps didn't stop. They moved through the apartment with purpose, slow and deliberate, like they were searching for me. I could hear them coming down the hall, getting closer, the whispering voices growing louder. I was running out of time. The boy appeared at the end of the hallway, his face half hidden in the shadow. His eyes, those dark, unsettling eyes, locked onto mine. You have to pick, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. It's either you or someone else. Why me? I asked, my voice shaking. Why does it have to be me? He stepped closer, his small frame barely making a sound as he moved. Because you took the job. You opened the door. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. It had all started with that one decision. The moment I responded to that dark web job posting, I had invited this nightmare into my life. And now, I had to pay the price. Please, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't want to die. The boy tilted his head, his expression unreadable. You don't have to die, but someone does. I stared at him, trying to understand. Someone else. He wanted me to choose someone else, to condemn another soul to take my place in this endless cycle. The thought made my stomach churn. Who? I asked, barely able to form the words. The boy's lips curled into a faint smile. It's up to you. Anyone you know. A neighbor, a friend, a stranger. You just have to decide. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but face the choice in front of me. But there was no escaping it. The shadows in the apartment seemed to close in, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. They were waiting, urging me to choose. In a moment of desperation, I thought of the man who had knocked on my door earlier, the one who had come to remind me of my unfinished business. Maybe I could send him back to the house, make him the new target. After all, he was part of this too, wasn't he? He had shown up, uninvited, to force me into making this decision. It seemed like a twisted kind of justice. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I felt a deep, gnawing guilt. Could I really condemn someone else to this fate? To the whispers, the footsteps, the endless fear? I looked into the boy's eyes, searching for some kind of mercy, some way out, but there was none. I can't, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I can't do that to someone else. The boy blinked, his expression softening for just a moment. And it will be you. My blood ran cold. The shadows around me seemed to pulse with energy, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, the presence of something much older, much darker than I had realized. I knew what was coming. I knew what I had to do. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone. I couldn't choose someone else, but I could stop this cycle from repeating. I opened the dark web browser, my fingers trembling as I typed in the words. Babysitter needed for one night, high pay, no questions asked. I hit send, the ad disappearing into the void of the internet. The boy smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was knowing, as if he had expected this all along. The shadows began to recede, the whispers growing faint, and the cold presence that had suffocated the apartment seemed to lift. The boy turned away, fading into the darkness like a distant memory. But as I stood there, alone in the silence of my apartment, I knew the nightmare wasn't over. It had only shifted, only moved on. The next person, the one who would answer that ad, would step into the same trap I had, pulled by the lure of easy money, just like I had been. The cycle would continue, and I would always know that I had been part of it. I don't sleep much anymore. The whispers are gone, the footsteps silent, but I know they're still out there, waiting. Every time my phone buzzes, every knock at the door, I wonder if it's them, coming back to finish what they started. Or if it's someone else, someone just like me, who's about to learn the hard way that some jobs are too good to be true. I was hired to collect data from a government server. I found a file with my name on it. It all started with a job offer. Just another gig in the world of freelance tech work. Nothing too crazy, or at least that's what I thought. It came through a contact I barely knew, a guy named Evan, someone I'd worked with a couple of times on basic security gigs. He was one of those people you meet online, the kind you never think about too much, but always seems to pop up when you need something done under the radar. One night, out of nowhere, Evan messaged me. "You ever handled government data before?" That should have been the first red flag. But I was used to odd requests, and honestly, things had been slow for me. The bills were piling up, and I was willing to look the other way if it meant a solid payday. "What do you have in mind?" I replied, keeping it casual. He didn't waste any time. "Got a client who needs some sensitive files pulled from a server. Government server. The pay's good, but they want it done quietly. You in?" I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting slightly. I'd done plenty of jobs skirting the legal line before, hacking into corporate systems, retrieving files for businesses who didn't want to go through legal channels. But this? Government data? That was a whole new level. But the mention of good pay made me hesitate less than I should have. "How much are we talking?" I typed back, trying to sound more confident than I felt. $10,000 for one night's work. I felt my breath catch. 10 grand? That was more than I made in 3 months. The thought of it hit hard, but with it came a knot in my gut. If someone was willing to pay that much for a job, it meant there was serious risk involved. The kind of risk that could land me in prison for years if I wasn't careful. Still, I didn't say no. I couldn't. Not with that kind of money on the table. I convinced myself that I could handle it, that it was just another data retrieval job. I mean, how different could it be from all the other times I'd hacked into secure systems? "All right," I typed, fingers shaking slightly on the keyboard. "I'm in. What's the job?" Evans sent the details quickly, too quickly, like he had been waiting for my response. The server I needed to access was hidden behind several layers of encryption, and the location itself wasn't exactly easy to find. But Evan had connections. He sent me a special access link, telling me it would bypass the first few security walls and give me a head start. "Do this tonight," he said. "Client's in a rush. You'll have a couple of hours max to get in and out. Make sure you're careful. This stuff is heavily monitored." That should have been another warning sign, but greed overpowered my instincts. I spent the next few hours setting up, tweaking my setup to make sure I wouldn't leave any trace. By midnight, I was ready. The link Evan sent me worked like a charm. It took me straight into the first layer of the server security, bypassing firewalls I would have spent hours trying to crack on my own. For a moment, I almost admired how smooth it all was. Whoever Evan's client was, they knew what they were doing. But once I was inside, that sense of ease vanished. The server was huge, packed with files and directories that I didn't recognize. Most of the folders were labeled with cold, bureaucratic names that made no sense to me. It was a maze, and I could feel the clock ticking in the back of my mind, knowing I didn't have much time before someone noticed I was poking around. I followed the instructions Evan gave me, searching through specific directories for a set of files marked with strange, nondescript codes. Everything looked random, meaningless, just data points, numbers, and information that seemed more like government budgeting files or basic security protocols. But then I stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. One of the folders was named differently from the others. Instead of a code or number, it had a name. My name. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a coincidence. There had to be a million people out there with my name, right? But as soon as I clicked on it, I knew this was no accident. The file opened, revealing a detailed log. Every bit of data in it was about me. My full name, my address, my phone number. There were even notes, personal notes, about my life. It mentioned jobs I'd taken, people I'd met, dates I'd gone on, places I'd been in the past month. It was all there, laid out in front of me like someone had been keeping tabs on every move I'd made for the past year. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just some random file. Someone had been watching me. Someone had known I'd take this job, and they had been tracking me long before Evan even contacted me. I quickly closed the file, my hands trembling. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Who would want to track me? Why? I was just a small-time freelancer, not anyone important. Why was my information sitting on a government server? And more importantly, how long had it been there? Panic started to set in. I'd been in this server for too long. I needed to get out. Now. Just as I moved to close the connection, my screen flickered. Then a message popped up. It was brief. Just a single line of text. You shouldn't have looked at that file. I froze. Someone knew I had found it. They had been watching me the entire time. My heart raced as I hurried to shut everything down, closing the connection as quickly as I could. But the damage was already done. They knew I was there. They knew I had seen something I shouldn't have. The worst part? I still had no idea who they were. I spent the rest of the night in a cold sweat, waiting for something to happen. For a knock on the door, for the police to come crashing in, for anything. But nothing came. Yet. I wasn't sure what terrified me more, the fact that I had found that file, or the fact that whoever had written that message was still out there, watching me. The next morning, I woke up with that strange feeling of unease, the kind that sticks with you even before you're fully awake. The events of the previous night came rushing back in waves, hitting me like a bad dream that wasn't over yet. I couldn't shake the image of that file, my name sitting there on a government server like some kind of sick joke. I didn't know what to do. Should I tell someone? Go to the police? But what was I supposed to say? Hey, I hacked into a government server and someone's keeping tabs on me. Yeah, that'd go over well. It wasn't like I could reach out to Evan either. I doubted he had any idea what was really going on, and even if he did, he wouldn't care. I spent the morning pacing around my apartment, my nerves shot to hell. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped into my throat, but it was always just normal, everyday stuff. A message from a friend, a notification about an upcoming bill. Nothing out of the ordinary. That was the worst part. Everything felt too normal, like the calm before a storm. But I knew something was coming. I just didn't know when. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out, clear my head. Sitting in my apartment made me feel trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. I grabbed my jacket and keys, deciding to take a walk through the park near my building. It was usually quiet there, and I figured a little fresh air might help me shake off the paranoia. But the second I stepped outside, that paranoia only grew worse. It started small, just a feeling that someone was watching me. You know how sometimes you can sense when someone's eyes are on you? That's what it felt like. But every time I turned around, the street was empty. Just normal people going about their day. No one paying me any attention. Still, I couldn't shake it. My steps quickened as I made my way through the park, trying to keep my head down and blend in with the few joggers and dog walkers scattered around. But every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw nothing. Just empty benches, trees swaying in the breeze, the occasional person passing by without so much as a glance in my direction. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that this was all in my head, a result of too many late nights staring at a screen. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I reached the far end of the park, I stopped by the fountain, leaning against the railing and trying to collect my thoughts. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out of my pocket, expecting another useless notification, but my stomach dropped when I saw what it was. A new message, no name, no number, just a single line of text. I can see you. My blood turned to ice. I whipped around, scanning the park for anyone who could have sent it. But again, nothing. Just the same joggers, the same dog walkers, no one paying me any attention. Whoever it was, they were playing with me, watching me from somewhere, making sure I knew it. My hands shook as I typed a reply, even though I knew it was a mistake. What do you want? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at my phone, waiting for a response. Finally, after a few agonizing minutes, the screen lit up again. Meet me at the bench near the fountain. You have 5 minutes. I felt my heart skip a beat. The bench? The one I was standing near? I turned slowly, my eyes locking onto the empty bench just a few feet away. There was no one there. No one anywhere nearby. 5 minutes. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to get as far away from that park as possible. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't. Whoever this was, they already had me trapped. They knew where I was, knew what I'd done. If I ran, they'd just find me again. My legs felt like lead as I made my way over to the bench, sitting down and staring at the ground, trying to keep my breathing steady. My phone buzzed again. Good. Now, stay put. I waited. Every second felt like an hour, my heart pounding in my chest so loud I was sure anyone passing by could hear it. But no one came. The minutes ticked by, and the park around me stayed quiet. Then, without warning, a man sat down next to me. He looked completely ordinary. Mid-40s, dressed in a plain suit, the kind of guy you'd never notice in a crowd. But there was something about him. Something off. He didn't look at me at first, just sat there staring straight ahead, like he was waiting for a bus or something. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. Relax, he said, his voice calm but firm. You've already been watched for a while. I just wanted to make sure you were as useful as I'd hoped. I turned to him, my mouth dry. Who are you? What do you want? He finally looked at me, and I felt a chill run through me. His eyes were cold, calculating, like he was studying me, deciding whether or not I was worth his time. You're in deep, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Far deeper than you realize. But you can still make this work for you, if you're smart. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you mean? Why is there a file on me? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You stumbled into something bigger than yourself. That file, it's not just about you. It's about control. You see, the government likes to keep tabs on people who might be useful. People like you, who can get into places they shouldn't. I stared at him, my mind racing. Control? What the hell was he talking about? You did a job for Evan, he continued, leaning in slightly. But Evan doesn't know who he's really working for. You do. Or at least, you will. There are people out there, people who know things, people who need data, information, leverage. You've just become a part of that. I felt sick. And if I don't want to be a part of it, his smile faded. Then we make you disappear, just like the others. My blood ran cold. The others? How many people had gotten trapped in this same web, forced to do whatever these people wanted? You're going to keep working for us, the man said, standing up and adjusting his jacket. It's simple, really. You do what we ask, and you stay alive. That's the deal. And trust me, you don't want to know what happens if you say no. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was too full of questions, of fear, of the sinking realization that I wasn't in control anymore. The man turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced back at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. You'll get your next instructions soon. Don't disappoint us. And just like that, he was gone, walking away as if nothing had happened, leaving me sitting there, my heart pounding, my world turned upside down. I stayed on that bench long after the man left, trying to process everything he'd said. My head was spinning, and I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Control? Leverage? I wasn't a part of anything. At least, I hadn't thought I was. I was just some guy trying to make an easy buck, and now I was trapped in a situation that I couldn't even begin to understand. I should have walked away. I should have gone home, packed my things, and disappeared. But the reality was sinking in. I couldn't escape. These people, whoever they were, had eyes everywhere. I'd gotten involved in something too big, too dangerous. And if I tried to run, they'd find me. They'd make me one of the others, the ones that man had talked about, the ones who had already disappeared. By the time I forced myself to stand up and leave the park, it was getting dark. The familiar world around me felt different, like I was seeing everything through a distorted lens. Every person I passed felt like a potential threat. Every car that drove by made me wonder if I was being followed. When I finally got back to my apartment, I locked the door behind me, but it didn't feel like enough. No matter how many locks or deadbolts I slid into place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe. Not anymore. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to reach out to someone, tell them what was happening, but who could I trust? I couldn't go to the police, and Evan had already dragged me into this mess. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was completely alone. That's when my phone buzzed again. The sound made me jump, and I grabbed it with shaking hands, already dreading what I'd see. A new message. You're up next. Check your email for details. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen doing nothing to calm the storm of anxiety building inside me. My inbox had a single unread message. No sender, no subject. Just an empty address with a simple attachment. The file downloaded instantly, and when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a set of instructions, laid out in clinical detail, as if they had been written by someone who had done this hundreds of times before. I was supposed to access another server, this one even more secure than the last. The instructions included encryption keys, access points, everything I would need to get in without raising alarms. But it wasn't the technical details that made my stomach twist. It was the target. This time, it wasn't just about retrieving files. This server belonged to a high-ranking government official, someone I had only ever seen on TV. The man was practically a household name, and I wasn't just supposed to pull data. I was supposed to dig deep, find anything compromising, anything that could be used against him. The weight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just stealing information anymore. I was being dragged into a political nightmare. If I got caught, I wouldn't just be facing jail time. I'd be buried, literally. I stared at the instructions, feeling sick. They had me completely under their thumb now. I was a pawn in their game, and I had no way out. I had no idea what these people were planning, but it was bigger than anything I had ever imagined. And the fact that they trusted me with it, that they were using me for this, made it clear how dangerous they were. I paced around my apartment, trying to think of a way out. Could I just ignore the message, pretend I never saw it? But then I remembered the video file. They had footage of me delivering that package in the alley. They had my name, my address, everything. They weren't just threatening me. They were keeping me under constant surveillance. I was their puppet. With a heavy heart, I knew I had no choice. I spent the next few hours preparing. Everything had to be perfect. If I screwed this up, if I left even the smallest trace behind, it wouldn't just be my life on the line. It would be whoever they were planning to blackmail or destroy with this information. When I finally connected to the server, I held my breath. This wasn't just some random file retrieval. This was an elite-level hack. I could feel the weight of every keystroke, knowing that at any moment, someone could detect me, track me down, end everything. The stress was unbearable, my pulse thudding in my ears as I navigated through layers of security protocols. After what felt like an eternity, I found the files they wanted. Thousands of documents, emails, and classified communications, all linked to this government official. I didn't need to read them to know that this was explosive information, the kind of stuff that could ruin lives and careers, maybe even topple governments. I transferred the files to the encrypted drive I'd been given, every second dragging by as I watched the progress bar inch forward. My nerves were shot, my hands slick with sweat. When the transfer finally completed, I disconnected, wiping every trace of my presence as quickly as I could. It was done. I had no idea what I had just stolen, but I knew it was big, bigger than anything I'd ever been involved in. As soon as I finished, my phone buzzed again. Good work. Stay ready for further instructions. No acknowledgement of what I had done, no clue as to what they planned to do with the data. Just the cold, detached message reminding me that I was still under their control. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of my apartment, feeling the walls closing in around me. The man in the park was right. I was in deep, too deep to ever get out. But now, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about making sure I didn't become their next target. For the next few days, I tried to carry on like nothing had happened. But the paranoia was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every car that passed my window, every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face on the street, it all felt like a threat. And then, one night, it happened. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a soft tap at my window. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then it came again, faint but deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding. I lived on the second floor. No one should be able to reach my window. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I crept toward the window, my breath shallow, and slowly pulled back the curtain. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, pressed against the glass, was a piece of paper. Written in thick black marker, in neat, precise handwriting, were 3 words. "We are watching." I stared at the note for what felt like hours. my mind struggling to process the three simple words: "We are watching." The words felt like they were seared into my brain, and the more I looked at them, the more everything started to close in around me. It was no longer a question of whether I was being watched. They had just confirmed it, plain as day, in the most unsettling way possible. How had they gotten up here? I lived on the second floor. The thought sent a chill through me. Someone had scaled the side of the building, left that message on my window, and vanished before I even noticed. These people weren't just dangerous, they were relentless. I wanted to pull the paper off the window and throw it away, but my hands were shaking too badly. Instead, I backed away, almost tripping over my chair as I fumbled for my phone. I knew what I was about to see, but I checked anyway. Another message. Of course. "Get some sleep. We'll be in touch tomorrow." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Sleep? How was I supposed to sleep knowing these people could get to me anytime they wanted? Knowing they could be right outside, watching every move I made? I looked back at the window, half expecting to see a shadow or figure lurking in the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the night pressing in from the other side. The paranoia was suffocating. My apartment, which had once felt like a refuge, now felt like a trap. Every noise seemed amplified. The creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzzing of the streetlights outside. I spent the rest of the night curled up on my bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sound, the next message, the next thing they would do, to remind me that I wasn't in control anymore. The sun was just starting to rise when I heard it, the soft ping of another message. My stomach twisted in knots as I grabbed my phone. "We need to meet. 3 p.m. Same park. The park. The bench. That cold, calculating man who had sat next to me, like it was just another day." I didn't want to go back there, but I knew I had no choice. I was too far in now, too deep to even think about backing out. When 3 p.m. rolled around, I found myself walking through the same familiar paths in the park, my heart racing with every step. The place seemed quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're missing something, like something's lurking just out of sight. When I reached the bench, I sat down, my nerves on edge. I waited, scanning the park, looking for any sign of him. The minutes dragged by, and with every passing second, my anxiety grew worse. What if this was it? What if they were finally done with me? I started to imagine all the ways they could get rid of me without anyone noticing. Then, without warning, he appeared. Same man, same suit, same cold, empty stare. He sat down next to me without a word, just like last time, and for a moment, we both sat there in silence, watching the park as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Finally, he spoke. "You've done well so far," he said, his voice calm but somehow more sinister than before. "But we need to make sure you understand something. This isn't just about pulling files or running jobs. This is about loyalty." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've done everything you asked." He turned to look at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not everything." I didn't know how to respond. What did he mean? I had done everything they had asked, hadn't I? Before I could speak, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the bench toward me. I hesitated before picking it up, my hands trembling as I tore it open. Inside was a photograph. I felt my blood turn to ice when I saw who it was. It was a picture of my sister. She looked happy, sitting at a cafe I recognized near her apartment. But the photo was recent, too recent. She had no idea someone had taken it. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. The man's eyes darkened. Consider it motivation. We like to keep things personal. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. They weren't just watching me. They were watching my family. My sister had nothing to do with this. She was completely innocent, and yet they had her in their sights, using her to remind me just how far their reach extended. "You touch her and..." I started, but he cut me off. "And what?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You don't have the power here. We do. The only thing keeping her safe is you doing exactly what we say." I clenched the photo in my hand, feeling the weight of his words sink in. They had me, completely. Every move I made from here on out wasn't just about saving myself. It was about protecting the people I cared about, and they knew it. The man stood up, brushing off his suit, as if this entire conversation had been nothing more than routine. "Your next task is already in motion. You'll receive the details soon. Just remember, there's no room for error this time. We'll be watching." And just like that, he was gone, blending into the park like he had never been there. I sat on the bench, numb. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a way out, but I knew there wasn't one. Not now. They had me in a stranglehold, and the more I tried to fight it, the tighter it became. I spent the next few hours wandering aimlessly through the park, barely noticing the world around me. The picture of my sister was still in my hand, crumpled from where I had clenched it so hard. The image burned into my mind. Her face, her smile, completely unaware that her life was now a pawn in a game I didn't understand. When I finally got home, I felt defeated. My phone buzzed again, and I forced myself to look. "Tomorrow, 10 p.m., you'll be contacted." I collapsed into the chair by my desk, staring at the screen, knowing that whatever was coming next would be worse. They had already shown me they could get to anyone I cared about. What was stopping them from taking this further? The real question was, how far was I willing to go to keep them safe? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind was a mess, looping endlessly between fear for my sister and the growing realization that I was completely out of options. The picture of her was still on my desk, a constant reminder of the danger that hung over both of us. When 10 p.m. rolled around the next night, I sat in front of my computer, waiting for the inevitable. My hands were sweating, and I could barely keep myself from shaking. I kept telling myself I could find a way out, that I could beat them at their own game. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. They had been 10 steps ahead of me from the start. Then right on time, my screen flickered to life. A new message, just 2 words. "It's time." I opened the attachment, and my heart sank. It was another set of instructions, this time for a location, a warehouse on the outskirts of town. I wasn't hacking into a server tonight. They wanted me to show up, in person. Everything about this felt wrong. I had no idea what they wanted, but I knew I was walking into something bad. But what choice did I have? If I didn't show up, they would go after my sister. That much was clear. I could feel the weight of their threat pressing down on me, suffocating any hope I had of getting out of this alive. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, each step feeling heavier than the last. The drive to the warehouse was eerily quiet, the streets almost deserted. By the time I pulled up outside the dark, looming structure, my stomach was twisted in knots. The place looked abandoned, like no one had set foot inside in years. The kind of place where things happened that no one talked about. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, staring at the warehouse, trying to will myself to turn around and leave. But I couldn't. I was too deep. They'd see me coming a mile away if I ran. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and made my way toward the entrance. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. The place was dark, except for a single light flickering in the distance, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I followed the light, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I kept moving forward, my heart pounding louder with each step. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, like there were eyes in every shadow, waiting for me to make a wrong move. When I reached the light, I saw them. 3 figures stood in the center of the room, all dressed in black. Their faces were hidden behind masks, plain, featureless masks that made them seem less human, more like shadows brought to life. And standing in front of them was the man from the park. He didn't smile this time. He didn't need to. The cold, calculating look in his eyes said it all. "You're here," he said, his voice echoing through the empty space. "Good. We've been waiting for you." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you want from me?" He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's simple. Tonight, you're going to prove your loyalty. You've done well so far, but this will seal the deal." I glanced at the masked figures, dread creeping up my spine. "What do you mean?" Without a word, the man gestured to one of the figures. They stepped forward, holding a small metal case. The case clicked open with a sharp sound, and inside was something that made my blood run cold. A gun. My mouth went dry as I stared at the weapon, the weight of what they were asking settling over me like a suffocating blanket. "You want me to kill someone?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression didn't change. "This is the final step. We need to know we can trust you, that you're willing to do whatever it takes to protect the ones you care about." I felt sick. My thoughts raced, panic rising in my chest. I wasn't a killer. I had never even held a gun before, but they were serious. I could feel it in the air, the way they watched me, waiting for my decision. "And if I don't?" I asked, already knowing the answer. The man's eyes darkened. "You already know the consequences." I thought of my sister, of the picture they had shown me, of the way they had tracked me, watched me, manipulated me from the start. They had me completely trapped. If I refused, they would go after her. I didn't doubt that for a second. But if I went through with this, if I pulled that trigger, I would never be the same. I would become one of them. The man stepped closer, holding the gun out to me. "It's up to you, but make your choice now." I stared at the gun, my mind racing. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, the pressure building, crushing me from all sides. I had never felt so trapped, so powerless. And then, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do this. No matter what they threatened, no matter what they held over me, I couldn't let them turn me into a monster. If I crossed that line, there would be no coming back. Without thinking, I turned and bolted, running back the way I came, my heart pounding in my ears. I heard the man shout something behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran through the warehouse, the shadows twisting and stretching around me, like hands reaching out to drag me down. I burst through the door and sprinted toward my car, fumbling for the keys with shaking hands. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I knew if I did, I might not make it. I tore out of the parking lot, the tires screeching as I sped down the dark, empty road. My chest felt tight, my lungs burning, but I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just drove, as fast and as far as I could, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a crushing force. By the time I finally stopped, miles away from the warehouse, I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly grip the steering wheel. I knew, in that moment, that this wasn't over. They wouldn't let me walk away. I had defied them, and now they would come for me. But I didn't care. I couldn't live with myself if I had gone through with what they wanted. The real nightmare was just beginning.